Welcome inside Black and Gold Riz Nation. Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak on the bye week. Cannot wait to just chill this weekend, watching some football, and then we'll soon be getting back to the Black and Gold playing the LA Rams in week 13. Week 14, right? No,
you had it.
It is week 12. Yeah, heading into week 13.
Yeah, I've been mixing that up all week. It's the bye week just screws everything up. But yeah, we are getting ready for a week off. And I would like to tell you we have a loaded podcast. We don't have a ton to talk about. This is kind of the deadest week we will have, for the deadest episode, if you will, like the last couple of days. Really no news. The Saints are actively trying to keep it that way. They're all on vacation, or I don't know what you call vacation. It was funny. I was on with Tommy this morning, Tommy Tucker, and he was like, "What do you think they're doing?" I'm like, "I don't know, but this is the most annoying week of the year if you're someone dealing with an injury, right? Because everyone else is doing whatever the hell they want to do, and
you're at the facility.
You are going to the facility. You are getting treatment, and so yeah, that's definitely it's an annoying week for, let's say, Erik McCoy, right, who is 100% in there getting treatment, and we're going to talk more about that. We're going to go through kind of the rundown. We have a lot of topips we want to hit.
I got excited a little. You said 100%. I'm like, he's fully healthy. Great.
Yeah, well, I mean, close enough. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to hear from what Darren Rizzi had to say about that injury and what he's now dealing with. He left early from that game. A little concerning. Sounds like it's nothing to be worried about, but we'll have to wait and see. Either way, we're going to get into that. Talk about kind of what people are saying about the Saints right now. They're cool again, which is nice. We're going to hear from Saints assistant GM and scouting director Jeff Ireland in the second segment. Mike Haas caught up with him this week, so we're going to play that interview for you mostly in full. We're going to trim some stuff out of it, but it's going to be mostly in full. And then the final segment, I just kind of want to do a reset for, 6 weeks left. What is on the schedule? Like, what are our expectations? What are the Saints' actual prospects? Like, what can they go 6-0? Is that even possible? What do we really think is going to happen? That sort of thing. But yeah, Steve, how's your week going? Have any big bye week plans? Let's get into it.
Definitely have big bye week fans. The wife's birthday is Friday, and then Monday taking her to Justin Timberlake in the Smoothie King Center. So Saturday and Sunday, obviously Saturday watching LSU, and then Sunday just chilling on the couch watching the rest of the NFL action.
I'm going to be watching the Tommy DeVito show.
Yes.
Like he's everyone back. Would be. I mean, what else are you doing? What else do you have to do? Tommy Cutlets back in action. Drew Lock standing over there like harumph.
Just chalk it up to scouting for a future matchup against the Saints.
Do you think they're going to have Daniel Jones be the emergency third quarterback? I hope so. I hope they force him to put a uniform on and stand over there like.
I almost feel like the Giants are like, just go over there and be quiet. We don't want to hear from you anymore.
That's exactly what they're doing. It's what a lot of Saints fans probably wish the Saints would do to Derek Carr, even though it's like, I saw a tweet. I can't remember who put it out, but it was basically like, okay, fine, Derek Carr's a decent quarterback, but I still don't like him. And I was like, all right, at least we're being honest now. Right. But all right, let's move into the rundown. So Erik McCoy, we mentioned it. He obviously missed 7 games after having groin surgery. He left early in week 3, came back in week 10. No, week 11. See, I keep screwing it up. Came back in week 11, played the first half, looked okay. Didn't allow a single pressure, so that's good to see. He's still got that form. He's still playing well. Then early third quarter, goes into the injury tent, comes out pretty quickly, rides the bike, looks like he's okay, goes back in there. You could see him kind of laboring. Like it was, I don't know how much of this you pick up on the broadcast versus, if you're watching the game and you can kind of see him in between plays. I don't know how much it was affecting him as a player, like from a quality perspective, but it definitely wasn't working out the way he had hoped. Like he was laboring in between plays. And when you look at the results of that game, you really were not able to run the ball in the early third quarter, right? Then you take him out, put Shane Lemieux in, and suddenly the offense is moving again. So I don't know. Maybe he was just limited enough. Darren Rizzi said after the game that if they needed him to go in, they probably could have sent him back in there. But they were playing it safe with him. So we'll have to see. And this is what Darren Rizzi said on Monday regarding Erik's injury status, etc.
Eric went through a bunch of tests, last night, this morning. Like I said, after the game, we really wanted to be cautious with that, because he obviously had all that missed time. And so it looks like, I think in the long run, he's going to be okay. I think it's probably a good thing we have a bye week this week, but I think Eric's going to be okay.
Yeah, and so that's a good thing. Like, this offense is much better with Erik McCoy out there, and you kind of saw that. Like, they ran the ball at will in the first half of that game. They seemed to run the ball at will in the fourth quarter of that game. But I would much rather have this offense operating with Erik McCoy, because I think it operates at a much higher level. I think you saw Clint Kubiak a lot more comfortable in his play calls with Erik McCoy in there. Like, they were running plays in that game that we have not seen through 11 weeks. So hopefully that's true, and hopefully he can get back. I do think that it's like, if they had it to do over again, they might have just held him out until after the bye. I just think that game was too important, so they kind of went for it. But
I'm a little bit worried, just because Darren Rizzi, I feel, is way more guarded with the injury status than maybe Dennis Allen was, especially like we got basically breaking news from Demario Davis about Pete Werner.
I think that's more so just like he didn't want the Browns going into that game like, oh, okay, he's got a broken hand, I'm going to go after it. Now, I don't know. I don't think that he's gonna. I mean, if the test had come back negatively and they were worried that he would miss the game, I think the answer would have been different. Either way, we'll have to wait and see. Right. Like, Deuce talked about it in the game. Like, during the game, I think one of the issues you're having is you have surgery, you got a lot of scar tissue built up, and you got to kind of work through that. And so it's probably a little uncomfortable. And he just wasn't playing to the level that he wanted to be playing at, because he didn't even go into the injury tent after coming out of the game, right? Like, he went into the injury tent and then went back in. But when he came out and did not return for later in the game, he didn't go back into the injury tent. They didn't even relook at it. It was just like, I'm not playing well enough right now, so I think you'd be better off with somebody else. Like, I think that was what it was. So, like, again, if they feel like he could have gone back in that game, it's more just a maintenance thing. And with a bye week coming up, I think it was probably a smart move to not force anything.
Push it, right.
But we'll see. And I assure you, Eric and Derek, for that matter, want him out there. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, Rude Me, you asked about the bye week plans. You have anything going on? I didn't ask you.
No.
Okay. Absolutely nada.
Getting some errands done. I got an estimate on getting my car fixed that I've been putting off for 2 whole months. Now I got to deal with that. But I went shopping. I got myself a pair of shoes. Yeah, they were on clearance. Yeah. Felt good about it. I got myself a fancy new keyboard.
Treat yourself.
Yeah, treat yourself. That's kind of how it was. All right. So, I don't like, this is my like recharge week. I'm just laying on the couch and eating Cheez-Its.
When they talk about R&R for players, I feel like the Saints media feels that way too.
No, I mean, I'm not like, I don't have days off, but I'm not looking for stuff to do. Right. Like, if stuff finds me, I'll do it. But I'm not like, oh man, it's Thursday morning, I gotta find something. No, it's not. There will be things, but not that I'm hunting down. Either way, let's continue on the rundown. So just 2 more injury notes. Obviously Pete Werner's dealing with that broken hand. You'd hope that 2 weeks removed from last week's game, hopefully he didn't get anything. Hopefully there was no worsening of that injury, right? And you'd hope that 2 weeks from now, or 2 weeks from last Sunday, he'll be in a much better position, maybe not have to wear that club. But we'll have to see. 2 guys who won't be back in week 13, but should be back, or at least can be back in week 14, Kendre Miller, Bub Means. There's always a little confusion when the IR trip envelops a bye week, but the language is specific for a reason. When you go on IR, you have to be out at least 4 games, not 4 weeks. So the bye week actually doesn't count toward that IR trip. So both of those guys, they would have to be on IR for week 13. And then the earliest you could see them back is week 14.
And you mentioned Kendre. I think everybody's anxious to see what happens with him coming back, just because there was that story about how, he felt he didn't need to be on IR, but Dennis Allen put him there anyway. So we'll see if maybe Kendre can come back with a vengeance after the bye week. Well, after the first game after week 14 then.
Yeah, well, in week 14, yeah.
Right.
And you, I mean, the good news with that information is that he should be good to go. Like he shouldn't be out of shape. So we'll see. And if the Saints are still in contention at that point, maybe he can be kind of an infusion for that final stretch run. Right now, you'd have to go beat the Rams without him. But if you can do that, then every time you win a game, suddenly that and that stretch feels like when it was, we're gonna have to finish with 8 consecutive wins. It was like that sounds impossible, right? Then you win 2 games, and sometimes like, you gotta win your final 6. Still sounds impossible, but not as impossible as maybe it sounded before. You win 2 more games, suddenly 4 wins. That's a month. Well, we just watched them lose for 2 months straight. Like it's definitely possible to win 4 games in a row. So I don't know. It's one of those things. And the more players you get back, Jamal Williams, you'd think you get him back at some point. Lucas Patrick is a guy you should expect to get back at some point. So we'll see. It's nice to see the team, even as bad as things got at the beginning of the season, it's nice to see them start to get healthy for these must-win games because at least you're giving yourself a shot in it. Like the weeks where Derek Carr was out, it was like you could play those games 10 times. I don't think you win any of them.
Yeah, sorry, Pelicans. It seems like they've inherited the Saints' bad injury mojo.
It's insane. But all right, couple more things. Taysom Hill, the most obvious offensive player of the week of all time. It is his second time winning that award. The other time was the other game that was like almost identical to this game, which was Seattle in week 2022. I believe that was week 5. It was actually an Andy Dalton quarterbacked game. So just that's information. We got to talk to Mark Schlereth on Sports Talk this week, and he kind of talked about Taysom and his impact and that he's a complete freak show of an athlete, which I agree with that terminology 100%. But this is Mark Schlereth talking about Taysom.
I've seen a lot of games in that Superdome, college, pro. I think that one for Taysom Hill as a runner, receiver, passer, kickoff return man, play on special teams, it goes on Mount Rushmore for me of players in a game that has done that in the Superdome. It's unreal to watch, and I've done this for almost 40 years. There is not one guy I can compare him to in that 40-year time frame.
You know what's interesting about that guy, too? He's 34 years old, right?
Right.
And the Saints have this. The Saints have this just kind of, and I'm not going to do a great job of explaining it, but their strength and conditioning program, they have a scale, and it's very scientific, and you scale from like 1 to 10 or whatever in a bunch of different categories, and in explosiveness and strength and all these different things. You have speed, strength, explosive, and like he ranks as the top athlete like on the team in all these different categories, where he's the only guy that's like a 8 or 9 plus in every category that they measure, every measurable category. The guy's an absolute freak show, and he's 34 years old. He's like, you don't even think about him as 34. Like, dude's in his prime, and he can run, and he just does everything, and it was really interesting to me because it was back when Tim Tebow played for the Broncos, and he got released from the Broncos, then he got released from the Jets, and he had opportunities to go out and play this kind of this kind of hybrid position like Taysom does, and he chose to go to baseball. And I was talking to Sean Payton about it, and he goes, "Oh, don't even compare the two as athletes, because Taysom Hill is a freak show athlete." And so really fun to watch that guy have success, really fun to watch him. He's just one of the most unique players in all of football, and I don't think people really understand, not only athleticism-wise, but just intelligence. He plays 7 positions on offense. I mean, he's an absolute freak show, and I love studying for Saints games. I love calling Saints games. And every time I do, I'm just like, I hope he's a huge part of the game plan, because I love watching this freak show.
Yeah, and I think like that's what people forget sometimes. They talk about Taysom Hill like, oh, he's this gadget player. And it's like, no, he's the best athlete on this team. I mean, like statistically, like scientifically, like he's not Alvin Kamara, but like when you measure the athleticism, like all the metrics you look for, he just does insane things. Like if you talk to Dr. Matt Ray, he'll tell you this. Like the numbers that he puts up in these like measuring drills, they don't make sense. It's bizarre. And then you remember, oh, he's 34 years old. I mean, I'm 34 years old. And I wake up with injuries. Like I go to sleep feeling fine, and then I wake up and my neck is like crooked for a week. Like I don't,
Right, yeah.
that is where I am physically as a human. And I don't even consider myself to be that out of shape. That's just, you're old, you know? And like the fact that he's out there doing the stuff that he's doing, it's remarkable. So, you know, you give him, he definitely earned that Player of the Week award. You know, I'd like to think, so what drove me nuts in 2022 is he had that game against the Seahawks, but then you never saw the Saints really get back to doing the type of things that you did that made him so successful in that game. And no, he's not going to have 140 rushing yards in every game. He's not going to have 50 receiving yards in every game, but you need to give him the opportunities to. And what's frustrated me over the years is it hasn't been, oh, they're stopping Taysom in a lot of games. And that 2022 season is a good example of it. It's been, oh, you didn't force them to stop Taysom, right? Like you allowed them to play you and not prove that they can actually stop this. And that's what I'm hoping over and like, you don't have weapons. It's not like you have Chris Olave, Mike Thomas, whatever, where you're like, oh, we're going to get them the ball. Like we're going to get this guy involved. Like you have Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, MBS, and whoever else you want to point to. There's no reason to not be getting Taysom double-digit touches a week. And if you get him those touches and they don't work, fine. But I do not want to see games with 3-4 touches from him. He is as important as an offensive piece as anyone else on this roster. And you just got to keep doing it.
No, you know, and through all the podcasts we've been doing, I think we've been talked about the touches for Taysom, if you will. And I've always wanted it to be in the double-digit categories for sure. And, you know, for whatever reason, even under Carmichael, it just seemed there were times he disappeared, especially in the second half of games when I think you would want to pound Taysom more as you're wearing down defenses. But hopefully, like you said, going forward now, there is no reason. You're not trying to, all right, we got to get Chris his touches. We got to find a way to get Shaheed involved. There's just a whole, you know, there's a big void with the amount of talented pass catchers and runners even on the team. You got to give Alvin his break with no Kendra Miller still around. We mentioned he's still on IR, but Taysom definitely is like that old throwback football player when they were playing, you know, offense and defensive side of the ball. You figured he could have fit in very well back in the day. Get him a leather helmet.
Some T's for T. Yes, throwback is a good word for him. And another throwback, here's Darren Rizzi telling us what he looks like in team meetings these days.
I look like Bob the Builder, by the way, in front of the room, just for the record. For those who've seen Bob the Builder, that's you can get a good visual of me right now.
Yeah. So what he's talking about there, Darren Rizzi, apparently on his first day as the head coach, as the interim head coach, brought in a shovel. He was like, I want a visual aid, and I'm going to talk about digging holes and filling them back in. So I'm going to bring a shovel, right? I'm going to bring a prop. And so he did that, and it was well received. And so
hard hat.
He kept doing it. And apparently every day at team meetings, he's been bringing in a new prop, like a construction vest, a hard hat. He's got a tape measure. He brought in a level to talk about finishing.
Yeah.
Because like you don't use the level until you finish, and then you got to make sure it's right. And it sounds like it's stressing him out a little bit. It sounds like I almost think it's like, hey, maybe keep this to like Wednesday meetings. Because you're going to run out of ideas. There's a lot of season left to be doing. Like you're going to run out of room. But there is more. There is more to that clip. So let's hear more.
Are you just ordering these props constantly, or like where are you doing this from?
Well, it's taken on a life of its own. So every day we've had to add one. So I'm gonna end up looking like I'm to show up about 20 minutes before the meeting to get all the props in there now. But yeah, no, we pick a different one every day. And so over the last course of the last 2 weeks. We've had a different prop every day.
Different prop every day.
Maybe this coming off the bye week against the Rams, the hammer will come out to try and pound the rock against them.
I'm pretty sure he's already brought a hammer.
Okay.
I think the hammer is already in the rotation. Yeah, I mean, like he's gonna run out of things. Like he's gonna be bringing in like power tools and like belt sanders. Like he's gonna have to. Yeah, it's gonna get very expensive after a while, right? And I don't know if you get a raise when you become the interim head coach from the special teams coordinator, but special teams coordinators aren't making crazy. But either way, but no, it's just an example of like, okay, the character and I've always said this: there's a fine line between motivating and leadership and corniness, right? And like if DA tried to do that, he would get laughed out of the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just funny because like, you can have two different people doing the same thing and it's going to land completely differently. And I just think that's a good example of that. Like, and so you got Bob the Builder standing up there doing that stuff.
He might have to be like driving a bulldozer into practice one day. I don't know.
Yeah. That'd be funny. But yeah, there is a lot of construction going on. So maybe he can just go out there and have like, it's like, can we have class out in the yard? Can we have class outside? But
like you mentioned though, it's going over because you're winning and everything is a lot, the air's thinner, the days are brighter, the food tastes better, everything is hunky-dory when we're winning football, and hopefully that Riz factor keeps going for them because the fun factor is also back with this team. And man, it's a huge turnaround for where we were during that 7-game skid where we were just, the dark days seemed to be just like there was no even faint light at the end of the tunnel.
No question. And one of the fun, another interesting thing is Darren told us that they're changing up their schedule for next week for Thanksgiving week, and so they're having a practice on Monday and they're kind of turning that into a Wednesday. They're having Wednesday's practice is going to be like a Thursday, and then they're going to have. they're going to have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday practice instead of a typical Tuesday off day. So Tuesday will be the Wednesday will be the Thursday, and then they're going to give everyone Thursday off, come back on Friday. So he was like, telling it to the media, like, you're welcome, which he's correct. Like, I would much rather not have to go out there on a Thursday or on Thanksgiving Day, I should say, just to do, like, they're all going to want to leave too. Like, they don't even want to talk to us. And then you're going to come back on Friday. And the funny thing about that is one of the reasons he's able to do that without, major issue is his brand is not, we're going to be consistent. We're going to keep doing the process and we're going to let the results take care of themselves. Darren's brand in this head coaching stint has been, we're going to keep things fresh. We're going to keep people guessing. We're not going to let them get into a rut. We're going to constantly be changing stuff. So it's funny because that has allowed him to make that change without it being like, well, if they come out and look flat against the Rams, they'll be like, wow, you messed up with everyone's schedule. And they don't, that just screwed because these guys are creatures of habit and you messed with that. And then suddenly everything kind of went awry. He doesn't have to worry about that because he's already built this whole pyramid on change.
Right.
And like, we're already changing practice schedule around what's different, but what's one day. And so the players get to appreciate that. And, it's just funny. It's the sign of a coach that understands he wants the players to like him, because that's a good way to do it. Is to be like,
media too. We love them for that, for sure.
Hey guys, you want Thanksgiving off? Here you go. Enjoy it. It helps too because you have the bye week, so it doesn't. Like if you were coming off a regular week and then you mess with your practice schedule, it'd probably be a little more difficult.
Yeah, I wonder if you do that the same way.
You're already coming off a week that you're not doing anything, so you might there's really no downside to messing with your schedule a little bit. Now I hope people don't eat too much on Thanksgiving and they come out on Sunday looking slow, but that's a whole other issue. That's my problem.
Yeah, the players on Thursday definitely, I feel like, going to be dragging at that practice. Maybe having it later in the day would help.
Yeah, they're going to do a little more cardio during that Friday practice than they might normally.
Sure. Work off that pumpkin pie.
All right. One more thing, and I'll push. I have a clip from Pat McAfee that I want to play, but I'll push that to the final segment when we talk about the schedule because it's relevant to the schedule. And I do want to do so. One thing I want to add to these rundown segments is our favorite stat of the week. And it's really because I have one this week and I had no other segue to get into it other than doing this. And I think we can probably come up with one stat every week that's worth talking about.
For sure.
My favorite stat of the week for this week is total touchdowns scored this season at AT&T Stadium in Dallas, because the team who has scored the most touchdowns at the Dallas Cowboys Stadium this year is not the Dallas Cowboys. It is the New Orleans Saints. The Saints scored 6 touchdowns in week 2 at AT&T Stadium. The Cowboys this season have scored 5. The Saints, through 11 weeks, we're not talking about week 5 here. They've played, 5-6 games at home. They have not scored as many touchdowns in that stadium as the Saints did in week 2, which is equal parts like hilarious and depressing for the Saints, because it reminds you of just how well things were going in week 2 and the fact that we are now looking at a 4-7 team. But they're not even second. Like, the Lions are actually second. The Lions scored 5 touchdowns in that building. So the Cowboys are tied for second in touchdowns scored in their stadium this year.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are making jokes about the Cowboys and Jets right now because both organizations are a huge cluster. You could throw the G-men into there as well. Obviously, we know Tommy DeVito's coming back in action for them, but it's just amazing with all the high expectations around this Dallas Cowboys team. Every single year, you can rely on them to find a way to fall flat on their ass. And yeah, this stat now, even in their own house, they don't even have the most touchdowns on the season. It's New Orleans. And as we know, that famous second line after the game seems to be haunting us, but whatever. I laugh, obviously, with all the wronggoings going on with the Cowgirls right now. And it just seems they're destined for a top 5 pick. There's always their buzz now too, is that, should Dion's kid and Dion are going to end up coaching there next year.
That would be something. Yeah, I find it impossible to get, and this is from someone who actually does care about the Giants. I find it impossible to get as angry about the Giants as the Jets must be and as the Cowboys must be, because I mean, I don't know if anyone went to this season thinking like, yeah, Daniel Jones is the answer. Like, it's like when they paid him, they shouldn't have paid him, and I get that. But everyone who watched last season play out was probably like, yeah, okay. Like, this isn't going to go well. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, like, good, because then we can finally move on from Daniel Jones and get a quarterback worth playing in there. And so that's what happened for the Giants. So I think in the Giants, in the situation, you're like, well, at least this is a means to an end. We were bad enough that they have been forced to pull the trigger on Daniel Jones, right? So there's a victory in there. And they're also going to be bad enough that they might have the number 1 pick in the draft. So you look at it that way. Whereas the Cowboys and Jets, they don't have that luxury. Like, well, you brought in Aaron Rodgers and gave him the keys to the kingdom. And instead of that working out, you ended up firing your head coach and GM. And and you can't get out of that clean.
We can throw into the fun stat category too this week. I saw that Aaron Rodgers has a worse winning percentage as a Jet than what's his name? The kid that went to Denver.
Sam Darnold?
No.
Oh, Zach Wilson.
Thank you. Yes.
I think
Zach Wilson has a better winning percentage as a quarterback for the Jets.
I think Sam Darnold's on that list too.
Oh.
I think Sam Darnold had higher winning percentage. So yeah, that's not great. Suboptimal, as the kids might say.
At least we get to face the Giants. We don't get to see the Jets or Dallas anymore this year.
But yeah, and the Cowboys, they spent all that money on Dak and CD, and it's like, how you gonna pay? Zach Martin's, he's gone, right? Micah Parsons probably gone. Because like, how do you pay those guys?
I find it laughable too when Jerry Jones has been pressed. He's like, oh, we just didn't have the money to pay Derrick Henry. What? Huh?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Anyway, that's where we are. So that's a funny stat. The Saints are the season leaders in touchdowns at AT&T Stadium right now. And I don't know. I watched Cooper Rush play the other night, and I don't know if they're going to be scoring any more touchdowns this year. So we'll see how that goes.
They got nada right now. I'm waiting for like CeeDee Lamb to start, putting out those I want out of here.
Yeah, I put a bet on the Texans because I was like, I watched the first like 10 minutes of that game, and I was like, Cowboys are going to lose this game by 30 points. They actually kept it more competitive than I thought they would. But I was like, there's no way. And like this, This game is in prime time, and at best, this is going to be a 3-score game at best. And I think that's what I think it ended up being, like 24 points total. Anyway, but that's it. That's the Cowboys. And if we can't sit here and enjoy the Cowboys' failures, then what are we as a podcast? So I'm sure Bobby Abear's happy.
There's always happiness in someone else's misery, especially Dallas.
Like when the Lakers are bad, it's like all those Lakers fans are upset right now because the Yankees lost the World Series and the Cowboys are bad, right? That's the big three.
Yeah, unfortunately, Jeff, we're going to get Dallas versus Giants Thanksgiving.
Oh my God. Yeah, you could probably get in there for like a regular season Major League Baseball game price. Like you could probably get into that building for like $40.
Might have to actually spend time with the family and not just locked into football for that one.
Right. Why even bother watching it? I don't think I'm going to watch it.
Nah.
Fucking Tommy DeVito. You kidding me? Anyway, let's end this segment here. We're going to come back. We're going to hear from Jeff Ireland, Saints assistant GM and scouting director. Mike Haas, talked to him, and some good information from a guy who may be the Saints GM at some point in the near future. We'll talk about that. This is Inside Black and Gold. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, unless you don't want to, in which case I'm not your mother. But we will be right back. Stick around. And we're back here on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller coming at you on this bye-week podcast. Going to enjoy a weekend. But before that, we're going to finish out this here pod. And we're going to do that with an interview that Mike Haas did with Jeff Ireland on WWL Radio this week. Talked about a lot of subjects. Talked about, the scouting. Talked about Darren Rizzi, who he has a pretty close relationship with, going back to their time in Miami. A lot of good stuff. We've even talked about why kickers are so bad all of a sudden. Because I don't know if you realize this, Jeff Ireland was a college kicker. He actually went to the Senior Bowl as a kicker. He went to he coached at North Texas. He kicked at Baylor. Which is kind of interesting. But without further ado, let's dive into that interview. Mike Haas, Jeff Ireland, hit it.
2 straight wins. You got a week off to get healthy. Just keep rolling with the changes inside the building and don't let the noise outside the building get in. Because, right? I mean, you're 4-7. It's been a heck of a 2 weeks, but you got to still work your way back into the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. And look, the year hasn't gone the way we wanted it to go. That's just part of our league. It's why everybody watches. It's unpredictable. The last 2 weeks have been different. Dennis is I would call him a good friend of mine, and I've known him for a long time, and wish him well. But on the other hand, I guess Darren Rizzi. I hired Darren when I was a GM of the Dolphins out of Rhode Island to be our special teams coach. So I'm super fired up for Darren. He's done a heck of a job these last 2 weeks. Brought in some different thoughts and changed some things up. And our coaches have taken to it. Our players have obviously taken to it. And it's a want-to-know week every week. Just prepare for this week. And I think, our players have really bought into the message that Darren's brought.
And I've probably talked to you about this before, but Darren wasn't the head coach that he is now. So Parcells was Miami. You were in Miami. He started in Miami at 2009 as just an assistant special teams and then became the special teams coordinator. Eventually, you and Bill moved on, but he stayed. And he went through Sperano, Todd Bowles, Joe Philbin, Dan Campbell, Adam Gase, 5 coaches, 2 coaching midseason changes, and he emerges out of the tunnel. That, to me, tells you a lot about the man that, most coaches clean house, right? But they kept Darren Rizzi.
Tells you everything. It tells you about his, number one, his knowledge for the game, his ability to build relationships with everybody in the building, not just the players. Darren's he's a real witty, smart. He's got street savvy. He's blue collar. You can tell. He's family oriented. He's humble. So all those are great traits. He's very collaborative in our process. We get a lot of credit for finding, the Deontay Hardys and the Rashid Shaheeds and the JT Grays. And, I don't think he was around for JT, but certainly Deontay and Rashid, he's a big part of that process. It's very collaborative. that process, Darren's got a big part of it.
Man, so many things can get lost in the stats, with the day that Taysom had in the fourth quarter. I want to ask you quickly about Foster Moreau. No catches in the first half. In the third quarter, he's got a 2nd and 8, plus 19. Another 2nd and 8 from your own 36, plus 22. And then in the same drive, now you're into the fourth quarter, it's a 3rd and 10. He really catches the ball for like a 6-yard gain. He does the final 3. I mean, it makes it 4th and 1. Maybe if it's 4th and 3, maybe it's a different decision. But 4th and 1, Taysom comes in, touchdown, 21-14. But man, and this team on 3rd and 10 plus has been a struggle, like it is for most teams. But man, those catches by Foster Moreau get lost in the game book, but they were humongous.
They're huge. And, he's a huge part of our football team. He came back off the injury that he had last year, and he was a new, we got him last year. He was kind of new to the team. But this year, man, he took ownership of this football team right in training camp, right in the OTAs. And, he is just the epitome of just a really good teammate, a true professional. He's got tremendous leadership, which really kind of gets hidden, beyond, with Double D and Kamara and McCoy and those guys. But he's a tremendous leader. He is the one that's going to say something if he sees something, which is exactly what you want. He's just a really good pro, and we're super glad to have him.
Take me through what you were watching with the Chase Young play. Now, again, you win the game, and if you lose the game, we don't talk about this like we do. But the play to me, he plays it perfectly. Like if he sprints on, quarterback notices him. The offensive line notices him. He just kind of he's almost in motion. He's just jogging, He gets to the position, and the quarterback's going to go, dude, screen left. This is gold. And the offensive line's got to go, screen left, gold, because they don't know he's there. What were you thinking?
Well, it's kind of like, no, gosh, no, dadgummit, it's kind of one of those like, oh crap, we don't have 11 men on the field. We're late, and all of a sudden, yes is, you kind of wonder. Like Chase is an amazing player, but does he make that play if he's lined up right? It's kind of one of those jokes that,
or if he sprints out there and they notice him. I don't think they even knew.
Yeah, I'm not sure they could have done anything about it. Anyway, I mean, I know they noticed him. He's 6'5", 285. Yes. So he's hard to miss. But yeah, it's just one of those fortunate plays. It could have gone the other way. That's certainly not what we're trying to do, is disguise anything. And that was our coaches said it in staff meetings like that. That's a mistake. We got to get that cleaned up. But yet we're very fortunate.
Trying to make this not the Taysom Hill show, so you talk around it, but this guy had a fumble and an interception, and we don't talk about it. Like not even part of the game. I know it ticked him off, and it may, but I mean, I just don't know if you could ask if you've ever seen a game like that from an individual player.
Well, I can't remember one. If it was probably in the last 6 or 7 years when Taysom was here,
right in Seattle.
Yeah.
When he gets, as Clint said, I was like, why out of the blue do we get, Taysom's everywhere. He had the hot hand. Sometimes you feel a guy with a hot hand, you roll with it.
Yeah, look, Taysom's, he just embodies the spirit of someone that loves to play. And every time he makes a play, he gets up with that grin. That, man, he was like, if his grin could speak, it's like, man, I love that. That was fun. And it's like every single play. And, he's a battler. He's unique. He's a better teammate than he is a player. And that's saying something. So just very fortunate to have him. And, we'll get into, the process of how we got him, and we got extremely lucky. And, but it's a process, and it goes to show that, those are just moments that you feel pretty confident that our scouting process works.
Now, I do want to go back a little bit, and I remember in camp, I may have talked to Kai about this, but one day in Irvine, it's you and Kai and Parrington. You're away from the field, the action, and you look like you had been in Papillon. Like, I mean, your beard was it looked like you hadn't slept. And I was going, and I thought about it, the position injuries that you went through in Irvine, wide receiver, O-line, was so extraordinary. This must have been an enormously challenging camp, one, but out of it, you get guys like Kevin Austin. You got offensive linemen that came in that that produced, and so the end result is positive. But man, it just felt like the way things happened in Irvine. You guys must have had some late nights.
We didn't have a ton of late nights, which is a credit to our pro staff. They were prepared for anything and everything that happened out there. Obviously, you go out to Irvine and you don't really expect to have that kind of those kind of injuries. I mean, there's something that we've got to get cleaned up in terms of how why we're getting some of these soft tissue injuries, but. Look, there's a great communication, and that's something that comes from Mickey with Kai and Michael and the pro staff and myself and even our coaching staff. Just kind of what we're looking for. Okay, don't cry over it. It's part of the process. Next man up, and that's just kind of the mentality of. What we do is, one guy goes down, you got to be ready to, bring another guy in. No one really cares, and it's just going to stress the team if you don't do it and you don't act quickly. So we're always prepared for those things, and that's just part of it.
And I would think a perfect example of that would be Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He's with Buffalo on October 14th. They trade for Amari Cooper. So then Buffalo releases him. You guys scoop him right up. I mean, you needed the help at the position, but still, other teams needed help at the position as well. I mean, is that, take me through that process and how that all worked out for the Saints.
Well, like I'm going to give the pro staff all the credit. I think I was on the road scouting colleges when that happened. And so, that's something that, the Mike Parrington and his staff, did. And, perfect timing, obviously, when you get trades at the deadline and one player goes to another player so one player goes to another team, that team is probably going to let someone go. And so I'm sure there's a tracking process. They're either going to be heavy. I don't know this. I didn't get any calls, but I'm sure there's trade calls, about MVS, when that happened, and credit our pro team. That's a player that's helped us immensely in these last 2 wins.
5 catches, 3 touchdowns, that deep threat when you didn't, when you needed it most. And, wow, the number of Kansas City Chiefs on your teams with Super Bowl rings. And I only say this because they've got to be good character people, because I remember Mike Hodges telling me at camp that Willie Gay could have come in and said, "What are y'all doing? This is insane. This is how we did it at Kansas City, and we've won back-to-back. What are y'all doing?" And he didn't do any of that, right? And they're just good character people. And I don't know Mark West. I haven't had a chance to say hello to him yet, but I just feel like those, Tano, Tyron, Colin, Willie, Mark Wes, there's a bunch.
They're all super high makeup guys, and they've competed at the highest level, and they've won a lot of games. And for whatever reason, Kansas City has moved on from those guys. But we're pretty strict about who we bring on our team. Also, I mean, that's one thing that I know Mickey and I talk a lot about, and well with our staff, is we got to be very careful to bring a bad apple into our locker room, because it's the most prized possession that we have. Is our locker room and the character and the culture that we have in the locker room. And, it's quite frankly, the reason we've been able to rebound and win these last 2 is that our locker room is strong. It's got strong leadership, the makeup and the, just the football character that these guys have. They like to work. They like to come to work. And I think Mrs. B and Mickey and Dennis Lauscha have provided a place that, that people like to come to work. That's not only players, but staff. And, that's the kind of people we wanted in our building and in our locker room.
Percentage of your day that deals kind of with the current Saints roster, maybe the player out there in the pro world that can make your roster better, waivers, whatever, dealing with pro scouts and then college scouts. I mean, what is, is it 30-30-30? What's the representative balance of kind of what you have to do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I would, look, from in the fall, man, it's 95% college. I'm I'm grinding on college players. I'm on the road scouting. Our pro department is well equipped with handling the day-to-day process of finding pro players from time to time, especially around the trade deadline. I'll watch some players that we're looking to evaluate, but after the trade deadline is over, my eyes are back on college. I mean, we're literally, there's thousands of players that need to be evaluated, and that's one of the reasons we added to our college department. We've added, from a national scout standpoint, we've added, an area scout standpoint, we've added a scouting assistant. I mean, there's just not enough hours in the day to get all the college players evaluated. And so our pro staff handles the pro stuff, and our college staff really kind of handles our college stuff.
I got to ask you, you were a kicker at Baylor, Southwest Conference back in the day, went to the East-West Shrine Guide, if I'm not right. Am I right on it?
No, Senior Bowl.
Senior Bowl. My apologies. So what is going on? Justin Tucker has missed 6 and 11 games. He hadn't missed 6 or less in any of his seasons. Dustin Hopkins has missed 6 and 10 games, thankfully. Younghoe Koo has missed 7. The last 2 games, kickers in the Superdome are 1 of 7, and I'm including all of Hopkins because quite frankly, Peyton Turner shouldn't have been called for holdings. They're 1 of 7. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it, especially from guys who I considered gold. Gold. I can only remember one Younghoe Koo miss, and that's when Peyton Turner blocked it in 22. I mean, we're talking about Justin Tucker, Hopkins, and Younghoe Koo. What am I missing here?
Hey, look, it's more mental. It's more mental than it is physical.
I knew that.
Yep. It's like the 3-foot putt or the 2-foot putt, and once you got the juju in your head, it's there. And I actually predicted up in the box that Dustin was going to miss this, that third one, just because I could tell that the juju was in his head. And like, I don't know what Rizzi's doing. Rizzi's a special teams guy. He's the one giving him the juju. I don't really know what's going on. He played Atlanta in Atlanta, and I think Koo was like 5 for 5 in the game winner, and then he kind of doesn't have a great game with us, and then Hopkins. I don't know, Hopkins coming back to the scene. We had him in camp that year, had him on our roster, and didn't go well that year either. So. Who knows? I mean, kicking is again, it's very mental. And it's tough to get that bad feeling out of your head once it goes in.
On the last Younghoe Koo, fourth quarter that could have tied it, the 20-17 kick. So the block early came from the defensive right side, John Ridgway. So on this kick, he's kicking through the south end zone. All the beef is on the defensive to Younghoe Koo's right. So he's thinking in his head, he's hooked his first 2. He did make one. So, and he's like, I see these big hands going up to his right. I've watched the kick 100 times. He starts the ball out like in his head. He goes, I'm just going to slice it in. I'm going to miss those big hands, kick it left, and just kind of like in golf, a nice little fade in. Because if you watch it, almost halfway up, you're like, there's no way this ball misses. But he overcooks it. He overslices it. But I think he kicked it that way because of the big hands that were up to his right, because he'd pulled the other 2. So in his head, he's going, I better start this out a little right. So the defense was set up perfectly.
Well, that could be true. I think you're taught to not look at those big hands or where they're at. You just kick the ball. I wasn't able to slice or hook or anything like that. So,
but my story's way better, though, right?
Your story is way better, Mike.
But unfortunately, see, you're actually a kicker, so you know.
I'm a has-been, but look, it's just you get the ball up high, get it up quick, hit it straight, and don't worry about the guys in front of you. Let the big guys, handle those other big guys, and that's what I always taught. And when I was a coach, that's what I taught as well. So, but I like your story.
Yeah, let's go. I mean, that sounds good. Overcooked it, slice, great win. And finally, for Jari, right? I mean, these games, I don't know what, Drew and the rest of those guys being there, and there were a lot of them. And that says a lot about Jari. But you want to win because you want to win for the team. Everyone's a team. But getting that win for Jari with his name up in lights, with Drew and everybody there, man, special.
Unbelievable special. I mean, that's, and Jari is such a nice guy. And, these guys are legends of the game. And I get to see him every single day in the office with this big smile, this humble attitude, this quiet personality that's just one of the guys. And then to see the ring on his finger and then the grin that he had after the game. I got to see him post game
dancing.
I got to say, hey, you know what? I said, I have to look at your name with me around with my arm around you just to look at it together. And it was just a cool moment. His wife was there with him, but it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And I'm glad we got the win. So he'll be able to remember that as a really special moment that we won. And he got his name in lights up on the stadium forever.
Sitting next to Archie Manning up there in the building, also pretty cool. And now, I mean, it's time. I mean, I don't know what they want in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but if you just look, I mean, I don't know what you want. Pro Bowl, All Pro, started 169 of 176 in New Orleans. He was a stalwart. I mean, I don't know what you want. I know guards don't get the, pub that they should, but it's time, right? I mean, it's just time.
It's definitely time. He's so well deserving of it. What he overcame, in a small school to come in here, and be as dominant as he was for as long as he was. I mean, he was dominant for 10 years, or, I know he played more than 10 years, but got me dominant. The Pro Bowl or the Hall of Fame is such timing. It's timing, and it's who's the first ballot Hall of Famers that are coming in that are just no brainers, and is there 3 or 4 of those no brainers? And so he's going to get in, and I think this is the year. And I just hope it comes to fruition for him. There's no one is more deserving.
All right. Finishing out this segment here on Inside Black and Gold, that was Mike Haas chatting with Jeff Ireland. Again, Jeff Ireland, assistant GM / scouting director. And these are two subjects I want to get into pretty quickly. As I mentioned at the end of the last segment, there's a lot of people who, you might be asking, okay, why am I playing you this interview? Well, there's a lot of people who are saying right now, hey, I want Mickey Loomis to move on. I want the Saints to move on from Mickey Loomis, right? And if you understand the scenario, the situation with Mickey in the organization and his role in the estate of the Bensons, it's pretty easy to kind of look at that situation and be like, they're not going to fire Mickey, right? It's virtually impossible that happens. He would either have to retire or they would have to restructure in some way. And maybe, you look at how the Pelicans operate, and I've said this in the past, David Griffin is the executive vice president of that organization, and Bryson Graham is the GM. And that was the case previously with Trajan Langdon. So if I'm the Saints and I'm looking at, hey, we could restructure this and make Mickey the executive vice president, make someone else the GM and in charge of the day-to-day operations and personnel, then that would make sense to me. And if you're doing that, then I look at Jeff Ireland as easily the most likely candidate for a few reasons. One being he's been a GM before. He was a GM with the Dolphins, even though that didn't go particularly well. And we could talk about that if we need to. But, a lot of people are going to look at Kai Harley, and I just don't I think if you're kind of looking at these two guys and you're going to say, hey, we're going to promote one of them, it would probably be Jeff. And then Kai would end up being kind of the second in command there, which I would say he's the third in command now. So it would be a step up for both guys, and you would go from there. But I think it's important to keep an eye on Jeff Ireland. He's interviewing for GM jobs. He interviewed for the Chargers job this past offseason. He's been a GM before. So I don't know, if it would not surprise me one bit if he ends up being kind of the GM, the day-to-day GM at some point in the near future.
I appreciate Jeff Ireland just because of the fact when I was doing sideline one of the weeks, I think we were going to Green Bay. So I wasn't just bringing my equipment and my bag. I also had the broadcasting equipment to be able to link up with the studio. So I was kind of struggling with stuff. And then all of a sudden, someone behind me ends up picking up one of my bags and helps me out. What do you know? It's freaking Jeff Ireland of all people. And I was like, wow. He's like, oh, name's Jeff. And I'm like, I know who you are. Thank you.
I know you.
Right. But I was just appreciative that a dude like that would actually help a peon like me.
No, and it's funny because we don't get to talk to Jeff that often. One of the only times we talk to him every year is at the Senior Bowl. And it's always kind of a weird experience because we ask him all these questions, and keep in mind, he's the scouting director. And I know a lot of grief has been thrown at the scouting department because of some of these missed draft picks. But what I need people to understand is, like, the scouts don't make the picks. Jeff Ireland doesn't get to make the picks. He might have a significant say in them, considering he's the assistant GM, but he's not writing the name down on the card and sending them in, right? Like, all they can do is give the information and say, hey, this guy, right? So it's funny because we go to the Senior Bowl and we talk to him, and like one thing he said a couple of years ago is, hey, I think we should have a dual threat quarterback. And then you go in and who do they draft? Jake Haener. Right? Like, you're telling me that this guy is like, oh, I want a dual threat quarterback, and then it's like, actually, I want Jake. I think that's not correct. I think so. One thing to keep in mind, and this isn't kind of absolving the scouting staff from making mistakes, but you need to understand that the scouts could come back with a glowing report on somebody and they don't make that pick because someone else decides something else. And it's like, I think scouts will get very frustrated when that happens, but we don't know what their reports were. And all they can do is send those scouting reports back. The other thing that is important to remember is the scouts don't have a crystal ball that says this guy's going to get hurt. Right. And you look at a Peyton Turner or Marcus Davenport, these guys are productive when they're on the field, can barely get on the field. So it's like, yeah, I guess we could blame that on the scouts too. Some of that's just bad luck. So I think the scouting department for the Saints gets a lot of grief that might not be merited because of some of these missed draft picks. And, I think my thing with scouting is you got to look beyond the first and second round when you're talking about the scouts, because the first and second rounds are the obvious ones, right? Like the first and second round picks, they're the guys who are at the combine. These are guys you have all the tape in the world on, right? You're having them in for visits and whatnot. Where the scouts make their money is identifying like the Caden Ellises of the world and the Rashid Shaheeds of the world and Deontay Hardy and, some of these lesser known guys. Some of these guys you might be able to steal in the third round, like a Jimmy Graham or an Alvin Kamara. Like, when I'm a scout and I'm trying to take pride, Mike Baugh was on with Mike Haas too. And Mike asked him, like, okay, what's the proudest moment for you as a scout? And he didn't talk about, hey, we found Mike Thomas out at Ohio State, right? We found this guy. It's like, no, I remember going to this little school in Arkansas and finding this dude named Teron Armstead. And it's like, those are, when you're talking about scouting wins, that's what a scouting win really is. Now, yeah, if you screw up on a first round pick, fine. But there's a lot of voices in that conversation that are not the area scout who watched Peyton Turner play or who watched this guy, right? Like, that's the head coach, the coordinators, they all have a say in that process. But when you get into the fourth or fifth round, it's always like, who likes somebody? Tell me who you like, right? And anyway, that's my spiel on, like, I don't think the scouting is the issue for this team as much as people want to make it out to be.
Whatever would be nice if they could get back to obviously the success they had in that 2017 draft. Whatever magic was going on that year, find a way to revisit that, please.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the major ingredients to that magic was having all those picks, right?
For sure.
Having 4 third rounders or whatever it was, right? Like, if you only have 1 third round pick in that draft, you only end up with one of Trey Hendrickson, Alvin Kamara, Marcus Williams, Alex Anzalone, right? And what if the only guy you end up with is Alex Anzalone? Suddenly, that 2017 draft, the magic of that 2017 draft is, it was a good draft. Wasn't a great draft, right? I'm sorry, Marcus Williams was a second round pick. But either way, you get the idea. Like, if you don't get all of those picks, then your draft isn't the same, right? And you're like, oh, it was a good draft. We got Marshawn Lattimore, we got Marcus Williams, and we got whichever one of those third round picks you really liked. And maybe it was Alvin. And we are still looking at that draft and saying it was a great draft. And you had Ryan Ramczyk as well. But again, that was a second first-round pick. If you erase Ryan Ramczyk from that draft class and you erase 3 of those third rounders, it's no longer this legendary draft class. It's just a really good draft class. So that's why I have ranted on this subject. My biggest issue for the Saints is not the picks they have made. It is their draft asset management and how few bites at the apple they have been able to take. And that's really what, to me, the failure of this season and why things got so bad so fast is not that the top end talent on your team is not capable of winning. It's that the depth on your team is not capable of winning. And there is a point that for any team, like there is a critical mass of injuries where any team, if you get to that point, you will not be able to win football games, right? And what hit the Saints this year is their critical mass for injuries is way lower than it should be. And you have teams like the Chiefs or whoever, like their critical mass is like way higher. Like they can survive. Now, most teams aren't going to be able to survive their quarterback getting hurt.
Right.
But there are teams out there that can survive 2 or 3 offensive linemen going down and at least find a way to win. The Saints aren't that team. And that's a product of not having enough young players developing and coming up through that pipeline. And that's a product of not making enough picks.
Yeah, specifically with that offensive line, we had questions about it going into the season. And then when you get, beat up there and you're missing a bunch of your key pieces, obviously with an Erik McCoy does not bode well. But at least, the fill-ins they have gotten with McGovern and Lemieux have done a decent job. It hasn't been a glaring issue.
Yeah, but again, like these are not players you drafted and developed. These are players you found off the scrap heap and we're like, hey, okay, maybe this will be better. And these guys are better than anyone we've had on the roster. Like we were better off going and finding someone on the Jets practice squad than playing any player that we developed. Think about that.
About to head to England. He was getting on a plane.
Right. And like Shane Lemieux, like is a little different, but not really. Like he was a guy who was on the Giants and you brought him in. And it's like, hey, this is better than anyone we drafted. Right. So that's my point is you're not even developing your own players right now. You're using other teams' players and saying, yeah, they're better than anyone we have. And it used to be the opposite. It used to be the Saints developing players and they would get ripped away because, well, they're going to pay him more because they recognize that this is better than anyone they have. But we feel like we can develop our guys. Now it's the opposite. Anyway, again, I just recommend that people get to know Jeff Ireland because I think he's going to have a very important role on this team for a long time. And we'll see what happens around him. We'll see what happens with some of the other guys in that room, in that front office. But I think Jeff Ireland is important. And also one more note. We heard him talk about Darren Rizzi in that interview. Darren Rizzi was on the Dolphins because Jeff Ireland hired him as a special teams coordinator on the Dolphins. One of the reasons he's here now is because Jeff Ireland worked with him on the Dolphins, and obviously Dan Campbell was on that staff as well, right? Came over here for the Saints job and helped recruit Darren Rizzi. But so if there is a champion of Darren Rizzi potentially staying on as the head coach, you probably could guess Jeff Ireland is in the Darren Rizzi camp. So if you're in a scenario where, hey, we want to restructure, we're probably going to keep Darren Rizzi as our head coach. Why not? So just something to keep in mind as we kind of go forward through the rest of the season.
No, the personality, the attitude, the players' reactions right now, coupled with obviously winning, has a lot of people thinking that this could be the dude next year.
And we'll see, and that's a good segue into what our final segment will be, which is kind of looking ahead at the next 6 games and kind of saying, hey, what is this going to look like? What are we going to do with this? How do you think the Saints are going to handle this? And I also want to hear from because I thought Pat McAfee had a good breakdown of like just the vibe around that suddenly is back to maybe not where it was after week 2, but back to kind of an area where we can at least be happy about it. So we're going to do that. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller coming back, previewing the final 6 games of the 2024 season. Feels like the 4th season that we have covered in this single season. It really does. But we'll be right back. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. One more segment here on this bye-week edition of the podcast. And, Steve, how are you feeling? Are you excited to sit on your couch and watch football on Sunday? Because I am.
Yeah, I know a lot of people kind of feel, oh, man, the Saints were just building up some momentum, and now we're heading into the break. It's kind of stifles things. But I laughed when immediately I think it was Derek Carr was asked about it, and I think we might have played it here, and it was like, no, we're looking forward to the bye week. This team needed that little bit of a breather right now because they are so banged up.
Oh yeah. These guys are banged up. They are ready for some rest, and I think that's important. Like, people might be like, oh, why don't they just keep practicing through the bye week? Like, no, they need rest. Like, these guys need to get their bodies back for this stretch run, and that's the thing. Like, if they had this, if the Saints had hindsight and they could point back and say, well, what week, if you got to choose from the future, would you have chosen to have your bye week? It would not be week 12. It would have probably been week 9 or week 8. It would have probably been, okay, let's hopefully we can survive one of these weeks where Derek Carr is out and not have to look to our backup quarterback, right? Or week 9, a game that Derek really was rusty in and probably came back a week earlier than was optimal. Or maybe he would have struggled in the first game back regardless. He was bad in that game, and it hurt you. But you don't get to do that. And at the end of the day, like we talked about earlier, 8-0 sounds impossible. 6-0 still sounds impossible, but like we've seen 6-game winning streaks before. It's happened, right? And for it to happen, the best case scenario is you win those 2 games going into the bye, and you kind of rest up, you have momentum before what would probably be one of your more difficult games in the Rams, and you have all of the like what are the advantages you can gain from the schedule? And those advantages usually include, okay, a little extra rest on your side and a little less rest on their side. A home game rather than a road game, right? They have to travel, you don't. So getting that extra rest and having it be a home game, that changes things. So, that's not going to win you a game, but I think there are things that make it impossible to win. And you don't have any of those things going against you in this game. All you got to do is go out and beat the team that I don't think is as good as people want to talk about it like they are in the Rams.
No, and for me with the Rams, I've mentioned it before. Sean McVay just has that punchable face for me, and obviously what happened when the NFC Championship game with the no call, it just makes me want to slug them even more. The Rams are one of those teams that have been a pesky, thorn in the side for this black and gold bunch. We saw it last year. We've talked about it too, how it wasn't fair for this team on a short week having to go Thursday night football out to, California, and they sure looked like they were gassed in that matchup. Unfortunately, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, they're all back in action. Everybody's, performing and healthy for the Rams currently, at least. They got a Sunday night game against the Philadelphia Eagles. I'll definitely be watching for many reasons.
And so let's start by just kind of resetting the standings, right? So the Saints, it felt like 2 weeks ago, were completely out of this race
about
in
it,
the
right?
NFC South, right? So the Falcons have lost 2 in a row. One of those games was to the Saints. The Bucs have lost 4 in a row. They're in a complete free fall, and it's a weird situation because the Bucs have actually played reasonably well in these losses. They've just lost all these games, and you talk about why did the Saints lose these games? Because they were close in a handful of them, but they just didn't have the firepower to push themselves over the top. They took the Chiefs to overtime. They lost. They never even touched the ball in overtime, right?
Yeah, I haven't got to watch many Tampa games of late, but I have, just from reading things, people have been just not the offense being the problem, but the defense for some reason has been failing them immensely.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they lost to the 49ers on a field goal, right? They lost to the Falcons 31-26, right? In games where you don't have either of your top 2 wide receivers and you're missing a few other pieces, that's ugly. But, so
they might be getting Mike Evans back this week.
Yeah, right. So they should be getting some of these pieces back. But, they're basically at the same record as the Saints right now. They're 4-6. The Saints are 4-7. The Panthers are 3-7. Now, I think they might not win another game all year because they're not going to play the Giants again. But like that's where you are. The problem is going to be the Falcons already have 4 wins in the NFC South, and the Saints cannot get to a 4th win. They already have three losses in the NFC South because they lost to the Falcons, they lost to the Panthers, and they lost to the Bucs. Now they have 2 wins. They beat the Panthers and they beat the Falcons.
Right.
But the best they can do is 3-3. So that means that even though they split the season series with the Falcons, they will lose the head-to-head tiebreaker because the second tiebreaker is division record. And it could get weird if they end up in a 3-way tiebreak. I'd have to go down that road. But for now, you look at it and you say, if the Falcons win 4 of their remaining 6 games, then they win the division, right? If they win 3, it becomes a little closer. But again, you're not beating them at 9-8. So if they win 3 games, really the only way for the Saints to win the division would be to win out. I think a more likely scenario would be 5-1, in which case 9-8 doesn't get you to the division, because the issue is you look at the Falcons' schedule and they have games left with the Raiders, the Giants, and the Panthers. So they're going to win those games, right? Maybe the Panthers, because it's a division game and you get a little more angst, and maybe the Panthers are playing better and Bryce Young is trying to prove something, and the Falcons lay an egg. I don't know. But, you look at it, you just chalk those up as 3 wins for the Falcons. So they're getting to 9 wins, it feels like. And then all they would have to do to win the division is to beat one of the Commanders, Vikings, Chargers. Now, they could lose all 3 of those games. But even if they did, the Falcons probably still win the division. So it's tough to look at, like when you say, hey, do we control our own destiny? The answer is no, you don't in the division, because the Falcons have the keys. If they fall off, if they lose 4 games and they end up 8-9, then it's wide open. But if you're the Saints, you still have to hope that you finish strong and they fall off significantly from where they were. And they got blown out by the Broncos this week, so it's definitely possible. But I still think a wild card, if you're the pie in the sky, how did the Saints actually get in? I think a wild card is probably the path.
And that seems kind of rough. I'd have to look definitely at the rest of the NFC standings, but a wild card, maybe not too out of hand than maybe some may think, just because of everybody's record around the league isn't as intimidating as you would have think.
Yeah, I only say that because I think 9-8 could get you a wild card. 9-8 will not get you, almost certainly will not get you the division, because you will lose the tiebreaker to the Falcons if you get there. I do want to play. Here's the thing: like, people are coming around on the Saints, or at least some people are. I think it's going to take a little time, but this is Pat McAfee talking about the Saints. It's actually talking with Adam Schefter in this clip, and I just enjoyed it. So let's listen to it.
Atlanta had an opportunity to separate itself, and it squandered that opportunity. They're still in a good spot, the Falcons are, but they were 6-3 and rolling, and playing a Saints team that, frankly, they should handle that game, and they didn't.
It's the Riz Saints now, brother. Different. Yeah. This is the new Saints, brother. Yeah. Taysom Hill's back to doing Taysom Hill shit, too. I put that tweet out about Taysom Hill. I'm like, it feels like Coach Riz walked into the offensive meeting room and said, I don't know what it is, but I haven't seen Taysom Hill do Taysom Hill stuff in like 2 years. Has anybody? Am I the only one that's missing anything? You got Taysom throwing touchdowns, catching touchdowns, throwing interceptions, fumbling. Mm-hmm. I mean, you had real Taysom Hill experience yesterday for this New Orleans Saints team. And I know their record says that they're mathematically close to being out of it, but why not Riz and the Saints getting hot?
Love it. Why not?
I will say he didn't actually catch or throw a touchdown, so I don't know where he got that information. But I think that's true. I think a lot of what happened in that game was Riz being like, "Can we just get Taysom the freaking ball? Like, can we just do this, please? We'll figure it out from there." And so, no, I think and that's kind of the tone you're hearing around the NFL is like, "Hey, it's unlikely, but weird shit happens all the time. Why not, right?" And you're going to get winnable games down the stretch of this schedule, and so that's where I'm going to kind of look at it, right? So, most likely your chance at getting to the postseason, assuming the Falcons get their head out of their ass and win these winnable games, is to go through the wild card. The problem is, you look at the teams currently, like you can say, yeah, there's a lot of middling records in the NFL right now.
Yeah.
But there is a gap between the third and final wildcard team and the rest of the pack, which is the Rams are currently the 8th playoff seed right now at 5-5, which you're like, wow, the Saints are 4-7. They're right there. Well, the problem is the Commanders are the 7th seed at 7-4. So that's a pretty big gap to clear.
Right.
When you look at, the Packers are 7-3, they'd be the 6th seed right now. The Vikings are 8-2. None of these division winners can really fall back to you because the Cardinals are 6-4. They're leading the NFC West. So even if they fell back to the pack, someone has to win the NFC West. So they would just end up being like they would just drop out of the field entirely rather than falling back into the actual wild card race. So the Saints need, in order to really get a run at this, one of Washington, Green Bay, or Minnesota to kind of hit a wall and fall down. And I'll tell you right now, the most likely team for that to happen to is Washington.
Correct.
And that also happens to be a team that the Saints have a game in hand against. So, and I also think that the football gods would smile upon a team trading their star cornerback to a team that's like, we're going to make a run at the playoffs, and then being the team that keeps them out of the playoffs. Like, if you were one that believes like the script writers have a lot of control in the NFL these days, that would be a pretty great
I'm looking at things. What's wild too, Jeff, Washington has a week 14 bye week.
Yeah, right before they face the Saints. Whew. And so we talk about, hey, how does the schedule help you? The schedule helps Washington there, but yeah, that's so late. I didn't realize they gave byes
really late, right?
Like that's, but it helps you in the stretch run, right? Like that's a benefit that other teams won't have. So if you can that's why if the Saints were 5-5 right now, or 5-6 or whatever, instead of 4-7, and you got that bye, you'd be like, we're right there. This is perfect. We're set up. We're gonna heal up a little bit. Then we're gonna go. We're gonna hit that sprint at full speed, right? Now at 4-7, it doesn't, like, you feel like shit because you're like, man, we feel like we've probably already made it impossible. So even if the Commanders, they lose their next 2 games, right? If the Commanders lose their next 2 games, going to that game at 7-6, you still have a desperate Commanders team. But that's probably the scenario the Saints need. They need the Commanders to lose 1 or 2 of these games coming up, and we'll see how that goes. So first things first, let's go through a rooting guide for this weekend, because it is week 12. You're going to be on the couch. So who should you be rooting for this weekend as the games go on? Now, I'm not going to talk to you about AFC games. I'm going to talk to you about NFC games. So the first interesting NFC game is Vikings at Bears.
Go Bears.
Vikings 8-2. They're the top playoff seed right now. Bears at 4-6. You root for the Bears. This one probably won't matter in the end, because I don't think the Vikings there's enough losses on their schedule to fall back as far as the Saints would need them to, right? Yeah. Like the Saints' best possible record right now is 10-7. The Vikings' best possible record right now is 15-2.
Right.
Right. So like, I mean, they could go 3-4 the rest of the way and get to a record that the Saints couldn't match even if they won out. So this game probably doesn't matter, but still root for the Bears, because, hey, maybe the Vikings are still led by Sam Darnold. Maybe he reverts to Sam Darnold, the Sam Darnold we know, and they lose a bunch of games. It's happened.
I'm looking here. Minnesota still got the Bears twice left: Arizona, Atlanta, Seattle, Green Bay, and Detroit. And Detroit's the last game of the year. They might not even be playing anybody.
It's definitely not an easy schedule.
Right.
Well, yeah, and that's why, it's tough, because it's a weird situation, right? Because the Vikings are 8-2, and I'm saying root for the Bears. The Eagles are 8-2, and I'm saying root for the Eagles. And we can just skip to that game. That's the Sunday night game, and it's Eagles at Rams. Now, why do I want the Bears to put a win on the Vikings when I want the Eagles to get to 9-2? Well, for 2 reasons. One, I want the Rams to lose games, because it's just one more team falling down that is going to benefit you, right? Like, you're going to be in competition with them the rest of the way. And also, hey, maybe it's a physical game and you beat them up and they come in a little battered and bruised, and that helps you. But also, like you mentioned, I need the Lions to have someone pushing them through the end of the season, right? So I don't want to get into that week 18 game and have the Lions have nothing to play for if the Vikings are trying to win to steal a wild card spot because they've lost 5 of their last 6 games and suddenly it's right there, right? So I want the Lions to be playing. So that's why I want the Eagles to kind of be up there with them. And the Eagles should be because they don't have a tough schedule left.
This sucks, Jeff. I can already see, as you know, we're not even, we're not even close to the end yet, but we're going to be talking about this the rest of the way of if this team does that and they do this, then the Saints could end up here. Obviously, if the Saints have to keep winning.
If it makes you feel any better, I don't think this is going to matter. But we might as well go through it, right? So a few others. Bucks 4-6 at Giants 2-8. Root for the Giants.
No doubt.
I mean, not that it really matters. Like the Saints have a game in hand against the Bucks, so they are really tied. No matter what happens the rest of the way. Well, that's not true. They're really tied right now because even if they both win out in that Week 18 game, like they're right there. Whoever wins it would be the. So like you don't need the Bucks to take another loss, but either way, root for the Giants because fuck the Bucks. All right, Cowboys at Commanders again. Now this is going to be a conflicting one. Root for the Cowboys. Yeah. Definitely root for the Cowboys. Now, Cowboys probably aren't going to win a game the rest of the season. Still root for the Cowboys. Because you need one of these teams to start losing games to have a chance at a wild card spot.
Do they end up going to Trey Lance?
You probably should. Because
it does not look good with Cooper Rush.
I mean, and Cooper Rush is like 30. Like, it's like, what's the point of playing a guy who's not your future? He's 31. Like, if Cooper Rush started being good right now, his career would last 4 years. Like, what's the actual benefit of going with Cooper Rush when you have Trey Lance? Anyway,
I guess if the tank is in full effect,
I guess, yeah. But all right, so a couple more 49ers at Packers. Root for the 49ers. This is kind of conflicting too because the 49ers are 5-5. So they're right there. It's kind of the inverse of the Rams. But again, I need one of the Packers or the Commanders to fall back to me. So I'm rooting for the 49ers, even though this would put them at 6-5 and actually ahead of the Saints. I'll worry about the 49ers later. I need the Packers to start losing games. One more. Cardinals at Seahawks. Cardinals are 6-4. Seahawks are 5-5. I'm rooting for the Cardinals because I just want these teams in that 5-5 pack to start sliding back.
Right. Goodbye.
Right? And the Cardinals are already winning that division. They don't affect me. Like if an NFC West team runs away with that, it doesn't really matter. So get to 7-4. I don't care. I need the Seahawks to lose because that puts me in better position. So anyway, that's the rooting guide.
Yeah, the NFC, the North and the West are kind of your problems there, but with so many teams bunched together.
Well, the North is your problem. The West I don't really care about because the West is going to kind of, eat itself, right? But the North is the problem because not that they're all bunched together, but they're all bunched together with a lot of wins, right? Like the Lions are 9-1, the Vikings are 8-2, and the Packers are 7-3. 2 of those teams are wild card teams. Yeah. Now, the good news there is they have to keep playing each other, so they all can't win, right? And that's why, like, I'm okay with the Lions. If the Lions go 16-1, that's a good thing because that means you have put losses on those other teams. So that's the only positive of that is that, yeah, I would be more worried if it was like, if there was 2 wildcard teams coming out, like if the NFC North had 1 wildcard team and the NFC West had another one. And like the NFC West leader was 8-2 and then second place was 7-3 because then they don't play. They could all win. Whereas when it's all coming out of one division, like you can't, and even the Bears are 4-6. It's not like the Bears are terrible. Like not like the Panthers, or the Giants or the Cowboys. Like the NFC East is another good example. Like that's one of the reasons that the Commanders is a tough equation because they're gonna have games left against. Actually, I think they played the Giants twice already, but they're gonna have a game left against the Cowboys this week, right? Like you don't have these really difficult matchups that you're gonna have to figure out. They did lose to the Eagles, so anyway, that's that.
Yeah, and like you mentioned there, obviously, you talk about it's a division matchup; those are always tougher. But the way things are right now with teams like the Giants and Dallas, nobody's worried about them at all.
No. But all right, let's go through the Saints games remaining before we get out of here, and I'm gonna flash up the schedule here to our right. But all right, yeah. So obviously, week 12 bye, week 13 Rams at Saints. Week 14, Saints at Giants. Week 15, Commanders at Saints. And so you look at this and you say, okay, there's one win on this schedule and 2 tough games. Now, why am I feeling confident about the Saints playing the Rams? And that's how I'll frame it, because you look at it and you say, okay, why would you feel confident after watching what the Saints did going across the country playing the Rams last year? And we already talked about the scheduling part of it. Like, you're not going to be on a short week. You're not going to deal with that. But there's other reasons too, right? Like, one of the things that really was clear in that game against the Rams is the Saints defense was just not prepared for that scheme. They did not play it well. They did not handle it well. And that's why, like, it felt so hopeless, because in every moment that you felt like, well, they need to get a stop here, they just couldn't. Right? The Saints now run a variation of the scheme that the Rams run, right? It's all coming out of that McVay-Shanahan tree. So what does that mean? And I talked to Alontae Taylor about this in camp. You've practiced against this scheme all year. Like, you spent all training at camp going against a team that's motioning constantly, that's trying to get you out of position, that forces you to be good with your eyes and not misplay these extra steps that guys are taking, right? So that helps you, right? Like, you have a little bit more institutional knowledge of what this scheme is going to do and how to play it. Fast forward to this season, right? Week 4, you go out to Atlanta and you play the Falcons. Who's their offensive coordinator? Zach Robinson. Where's Zach Robinson from? The Rams. He was Sean McVay's understudy. Raheem Morris, also out with Sean McVay. So what do you think the Falcons offense is doing right now? They're running Sean McVay's offense with Kirk Cousins, who is a very similar quarterback to Matthew Stafford. A ton of arm talent, not particularly mobile, right? So you handled them pretty well in week 4. They didn't score an offensive touchdown. They ran the ball, but they didn't throw the ball. Fast forward to week 10. You see that same offense again. You pretty much shut it down. Again, they ran the ball. They didn't throw the ball on you. They completed a few difficult passes, but you played pretty good coverage in that game. So I kind of look at that and say, hey, I feel a whole lot better about how the Saints are going to handle this Rams scheme than I did last year. Now, they have Puka Nacua. I always want to say Puka Cup and Cooper Nacua. They have Puka Nacua and Cooper Cup, and those guys are going to be tough to stop. They have Kyron Williams, who's going to be tough to stop. But I don't see this as the same matchup as last year, because you have a whole lot more institutional knowledge about how to stop that offense. So that's why I feel a little better about it. Also knowing that in 2022, this Rams team came to New Orleans and they didn't have Puka Nacua back then. But the Saints handled them pretty well. Like, I've seen people say, like, oh, the Rams have the Saints number, and like, they didn't in 22. Like, you beat them with Andy Dalton pretty handily. Obviously, Stafford got hurt in that game.
Right.
Finish it out. But it's not like they were getting blown off the field while he was in there. So I don't know. Like, I think we're glazing the Rams a little bit because of what happened in week 16 of last year. And I just think that game was more of a mirage than this Saints not being able to handle that scheme in any way.
I sure hope so, because one thing's for sure, Jeff, if they don't get that pass rush clicking against a guy like Stafford, we might have mentioned this before, he definitely will pick you the fuck apart.
Sure, and they're going to get theirs. I'm not saying that you're going to shut out the Rams.
No, right.
I'm just saying that, like, they're not going to score on every possession like it felt like they were going to do in that game, where the only thing that stopped them was like 4th downs. Right. And I think, like, you're going to have to score to beat them, and that's the bigger question to me, is can you put up the points? And, this is a Rams team without Aaron Donald. They don't have Aaron Donald anymore, so they're a little bit more susceptible in the middle of the field, right, in the middle of the defensive line. So we'll see, but I think that's what it's going to be about, is can you score? Can you put points on the board and then take advantage of opportunities when they exist? But again, this Rams offense all season long hasn't been blowing people off. Like, now, obviously, they didn't have Cooper Kupp. They didn't have Puka Nacua for a good stretch. They have those guys now, and that changes things for them. They've won 4 of the last final 5 games. But they did just get beaten up by the Dolphins. They got taken down to the wire by the Seahawks. So they played the Patriots last week, and that was a closer game than you would expect. So we'll see. They won that game 28-20, but I don't know. I think the Saints are going to put up a fight. Their backs against the wall. And here's the thing: you win that game, suddenly you're in a position that you get to go out and face a Giants team with Tommy DeVito, you should be able to win that game. And then you're on a 4-game winning streak. And like I said, every time you win a couple games, that 8-0 finish feels a little less impossible, right? And so one of the reasons it felt impossible is we got to beat the Rams. So if you go and beat the Rams and you go and beat the Giants, then you're sitting there and saying, hey, we just won 4 games in a row. We saw how that happens. Can we do it again?
Yeah, shoot. We dropped 7. Why can't we win 8?
That's what Foster said. And that was my logic in my youth soccer days. Never worked then either. Like, oh, we got outscored. If they scored 10 goals in the first half, why can't we score 10 in the second?
Right.
Oh, because we're not good enough? Yeah. That's
oh yeah.
I didn't factor that in. I didn't factor the talent part of it in.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the Rams maybe get a little bit overblown because maybe name and head coach, they do have the weapons, but for whatever reason, they definitely aren't clicking, obviously, right now at 5-5. And yeah, they are healthier right now, but you just mentioned games that they could have been, they could have had in hand that they should have. You end up dropping matchups to like the Miami Dolphins. They didn't look good at all.
No, and that was a primetime game, I think, on Monday game.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, like it's going to be a tough game. Don't get me wrong, but I think a lot of people are looking at it and saying like, "Oh, they can't win this game." Like they can win this game, and if they do, then things start to look a lot more possible. And so it's hard to get past this game as we talk about the rest of the schedule.
Yeah, right.
But for the purposes of talking about the rest of the schedule, let's just say, okay, they win. Because if they lose, then a lot of this ceases to matter. If they win, then everything's still on the table for you. And you go out to New York, and I'm just going to tell you, the Saints are going to win that game. Like the Giants aren't winning the game this season.
Yeah, playing outside in December in New York is not scary to me either. I'll just turn back to obviously that Browns game when it was 0 degrees, negative degrees outside. So weather won't be a factor. You don't want to see obviously snow, wet conditions, something like that. But the way the Giants are playing, I'm definitely not worried about them being able to sustain any kind of momentum against this black and gold bunch.
I mean, weather will be a factor if it's like that, but it's going to be a factor for both teams. Like that's the thing that drives me nuts is like we talk about cold as if like, the Saints can't play in the cold. Like, you think the Giants are out there rolling around in snow every day? Like, no, they practice inside too. Like they don't want to play in the snow any more than the Saints do. And I think a lot of times when you have those kind of cold weather games and everyone spends all week talking about how the Saints don't have a chance because it's cold, they take that personally. Like, they're like, all right, fine, bet, right? And they go out there and we saw that against Cleveland, right? I remember one time Coastal Carolina went to go play Montana when I covered Coastal when I lived in Myrtle Beach, and it was like negative 25 degrees, and everyone's like, these Myrtle Beach kids, they're going to come out here and get rolled. They won by like 30. Like, because they were it's just like there's that kind of motivating factor of like, they're calling us soft. All right, let's see who's soft. And I think a lot of times the home team buys into that. And they kind of then they might lose their edge. Whereas this other team has like been hearing all week how they don't have a chance, and so they're like, all right, let's see it. So I don't know. And then as we mentioned, Washington comes into town. The most concerning part of about that matchup, like you said, is Washington gets a week to rest, because I think one thing that's been happening with Washington, they've lost their last 2 games, is Jaden Daniels is dealing with a rib injury, and if he's healthy and gets a week off and gets a rest and comes back, then that game looks a lot more scary to me than it might right now, based on what I've seen them do over their last 2 games, because they haven't looked particularly good over the last 2 games.
No, everyone's wondering if obviously, Jaden's hit that rookie wall already. Just hopefully it keeps going, and we see that in week 15. Scary too, obviously, from the factor of he is definitely a quarterback you got to worry about running.
Yeah, no question. Right. And it's funny. We haven't really seen the Saints have to deal with that this year. Like, we've talked a lot about it, but, and there's so many mobile quarterbacks in the NFL now, so many guys who are going to run around. I wouldn't say the Saints have had a ton of situations that they've had to manage that in. Like Justin Herbert ran, but he's not a running quarterback. Jalen Hurts ran. He is a running quarterback. He didn't run that much. Right. He kind of kept him in the pocket. Kirk Cousins obviously isn't going to run. Baker's not really going to run. Who else have the Saints played? Bo Nix did run and was a problem. He's probably a good example of a guy that, took advantage of that.
Mahomes rushing yards. I don't think it was ridiculous at all.
No, Mahomes is a guy who kind of scrambles.
Yeah.
To throw, not so much to run, but he runs when he needs to, and he almost always gets exactly what he needs.
Of course,
which is exhausting. So yeah, no, if Jaden feels comfortable running around, and I think when you have a rib injury, maybe you don't, because you just don't want to take that hit. So if he's healthy and able to run around, then I think that game could go sideways for the Saints. And obviously Marshawn's going to be there. Marshawn's going to be motivated. I mean, I say obviously, maybe. Let's see if he gets on the field. He's not practicing today.
Oh, you saw that already, huh?
Well, I saw maybe I'm thinking about yesterday, but he didn't practice on Wednesday of this week, and so he's dealing with. I mean, like for all you folks who are talking about business decisions,
right?
Clearly, there's a real injury there, and I almost wonder if he passed his physical, so clearly they didn't think it was like anything like super crazy, but I think Commanders fans they're going to turn on him pretty soon.
Yeah, it's going to be a point now. It's like, all right, how many weeks is it that we've acquired you and you're still not on the field? What the hell?
Right. Like they're all excited. They got this guy. Sure. They're going to turn on him pretty soon, I bet. Especially if they keep losing games and you're like, what the hell?
As the Cajun Cannon loves to say, he's hell when he's well.
Just not well. But yeah, and then so you get after that Commanders game, if you manage to win that one too, right? Like again, we're kind of going through this as if you do. And you look at the rest of the schedule, you end up with Packers, Raiders, Bucks. Now, the Packers game, I would say, is the hardest game left on your schedule.
Agreed.
For a few reasons. But one of those reasons being it's December 23rd at Lambeau. And when I say like the Giants aren't spending a lot of time rolling around in the snow and having a good time.
Not even a noon kickoff.
Yeah, at night, 7:15 p.m. on a Monday. Maybe it get flexed out. We don't know. But we talk about, like I said, I don't think the Giants are rolling around in the snow and like super excited about a cold weather game. I think the Packers are. I think the Packers are a team like the Packers, the Bills. These are teams. It's like, the Bane thing. It was like, you just adopted the dark. I was born in it. Like that's the Packers. Like they do this all the freaking time. So they know how to play in it. They know how to warm up in it. They know how to be comfortable in it. I'm sure like the visitors sideline doesn't have the right kind of heaters or something like, so if that game is an ice bowl, I find that's not, I don't think they're going to go in there like they did against Cleveland and win that game, but who knows? We don't know. It might be unseasonably warm. And
that's what I'm hoping for your sake, for crying out loud.
I mean, we're not even talking about me. I'm talking about the players, but I'm going to die. I'm already accumulating warm weather or like warm clothing. Like I got a puffer jacket.
Just stay near that heater most of the game.
Yeah. Normally I like to pace. I think I'll have to pace to stay alive in that game. If I stay still for more than 30 seconds, I might die. But so that's going to be a tough one. That said, this Packers team has not, there's not a lot of teams blowing anybody out right now.
Right.
And you're looking at their last 3 games. They beat the Bears on a blocked field goal at the last second at the buzzer. Right. So that's the Bears, a team that's not particularly good. They should have won that game. They lost to the Lions, which, a lot of teams lose to the Lions. They're 9-1. And then they beat the Jaguars, a team that is very much let go of the rope, 30-27 on a game-winning field goal by Brandon McManus. So this is not a team that's blowing people out. We've seen the Saints play them, and they dominated for 3 quarters. Now, it would have been nice if they had dominated for even 3.5 quarters, but that's neither here nor there. So they're going to be a little motivated to go up there and play that game. We'll see how it goes. Jordan Love has been hurt all year. Who's to say that he's even there for that game? He keeps getting hurt. So if you end up playing Malik Willis, I feel pretty good about it. But either way, that's week 16. Then week 17, you come back home, you host the Raiders. That's going to be a game. Like you look at the schedule, there's 2 games on it that the Saints are going to win. I'll guarantee it. I'll put any amount of money on it you want. They're going to beat the Giants in week 14. They're going to beat the Raiders in week 17. The Raiders have currently lost 6 consecutive games. The Giants aren't that far off from that. I think they've lost 3 or 4 in a row.
That's a case where obviously that interim factor has worn off now with Pierce being the full-time guy there now.
Yeah, Antonio Pierce is making the case to GMs everywhere that they should not like make that call based on the emotion. Although like they didn't give him a quarterback.
No. Right.
Devontae Adams was clearly not bought in. He's gone now. He's on the Jets on a team that's just as bad. But he's with his friend, he's with Buddy. So they can figure that out. But So you're going to win that game. It's going to be an emotional, like Derek Carr will probably try to downplay it, but that's an emotional game anytime you go against a team that not only you played your majority of your career with, but then they cut you. So those are two games you'll win, right? Then there's a game that I feel pretty confident about in Week 18 against the Bucs, just because the Saints win at that stadium. They do. They have more success at Raymond James over the last several years than they have at the Superdome. As weird as it is, they just like sometimes there's just these stadiums that you feel comfortable in.
But they're a dome team, Jeff. What are you talking about?
Hey, it's going to be 70 in December at Raymond James, right? Like I'm not worried about that at all. But and who's to say? Who knows where the Bucs are at that point? If they keep stacking up losses like they have been, maybe they're out of it, and you end up facing Kyle Trask. You don't know. Either way, if you're the Saints and you end up in a scenario where you have to go out on the road in Week 18, like. And go win a game to give yourself a chance at the postseason, I don't think there's anywhere I'd rather be than Raymond James.
Yeah, for me, you mentioned obviously the remaining games: Green Bay, Rams, and then Washington. For me, are the three toughest.
Right. So like I was saying, like there's two games you are gonna win: Giants, Raiders. There's a third game that I feel pretty good about in the Bucs at Raymond James. And then there's three games that are kind of, I would say they're a toss-up. I think they're going to be close, and you're going to have to go win them. And that's in order of difficulty. Like you said, I agree with you. Packers, Rams, Commanders. Two of those games you have at home. One of them you have in the most hostile environment you could imagine on December 23rd. And so that's where you are. But what I will say is, as impossible as going 6-0 in that stretch sounds, there aren't any like sure losses. Like you're not going and facing the Lions. You're not facing the Chiefs. You're not facing the Ravens. You're not facing the Bills. You're not going against the team that's a Super Bowl favorite that's going to blow you off the field. You're going against teams that are wild card contenders.
And you mentioned the Lions, and right now I think anybody facing them is like, damn, they're obviously putting points on the board like nothing, and they're mean. They're a nasty team.
Yeah, they're going to run up the score on you, and they're going to laugh while they do it.
Right.
Even if you had a game against the Broncos, I'd be like, they're not winning that game. Like, but I don't know. Like, I think there's going to be at least something to watch. And here's the thing: like, these are wild card teams that you're facing, and if you want to make the case that you're a wild card team, you got to go out and beat those wild card teams. So that's it. That's the schedule.
No, I'm just we got to somehow get the players to share those Merry Christmas jerseys with us and those shirts, and so the media can have some.
Yeah, and I think that I appreciate that the team won 2 games so we could at least have this conversation.
Yes,
even though it's insanely unlikely and you're whatever, but the fact that we're able to sit here through a bye week and be like, what if this craziness happens? Yeah, most likely scenario is you end up 8-9, right? Like again, I think you win the game against like you're the worst case scenario in my opinion is 6-11. If you beat the Raiders, you beat the Giants, and then you lose your other 4 games. 8-9 feels more likely because I think you probably beat the Bucs in Week 18. If both teams are out of it, the Saints are the team that goes and wins that game in despite their own best interest, right? Like that's just who they are as an organization. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case and you end up winning that game. And then
I truly believe Rizzi's going to keep that same kind of fire. Obviously, he's got a ton to prove.
Exactly. Like he has no motivation to go out there and not look as good as possible in Week 18. But we saw like Steve Wilkes had that same motivation. It didn't work out for him in 22. So, and I think you probably beat at worst, you probably find a way to beat one of those 3 teams in the Rams, Commanders, Packers. I wouldn't be surprised if you beat the Rams, then you lose to the Commanders and Packers. Because if you beat the Rams, you beat the Giants, then you lose to the Commanders. That's going to be very demotivating for you to then go out to Green Bay 2 days before Christmas and play that Ice Bowl game, right? So I could see that happening. I could see, you feel really good. You've won 4 games in a row, and then it all comes crashing down against Washington. And then that funnels into the next week. So I think probably 8-9 would be or 7-10 would be my guess the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I'd be curious, like, what exactly is enough for Riz to keep the job? I know we talked a little bit about that in a previous podcast.
Yeah, again, I think it's more about, I don't think there's any record that would necessarily guarantee you the job. And I think the way I put it last time was like, okay, I need you to go 4-4 at worst to give yourself a reasonable case. And then at that point, it's about, how did you play? How did you look in those games? How did the team buy in? And so far, it's all been positive. And so far, you've won all of your games. So I don't even know how he would respond if he lost. Like, we haven't even seen that happen. Like, what does a post-game angry Riz look like?
I just think that's normal Riz, right?
Maybe, I don't know if what prop do you think he would bring, like a broadsword to add to his, like, he's like, I'm not Bob the Builder anymore. I am
the Highlander, right? Or something. I don't know.
The Highlander.
There could be only one.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a good place to wrap up this pod. Thanks everyone for hanging out. This is going to be the only pod for this week. It's going to be a 2-pod week, and we'll get back to our normal schedule on Monday, heading into week 13. We'll see where things stand with all of the teams the Saints are chasing after that. But again, if you want to check out that routing guide, it's on WWL.com. Kind of broke down all the paths that the Saints have and where things are. And it's got that in there, so check it out. Otherwise, thanks everyone for listening. Who dat? Go Saints.
Later, folks.
Peace.